In A Song of Ice and Fire, there is one dominant political and economic system in Westeros, and that is feudalism. Everyone is a feudalist. In this video, I am going to talk about what characters I think would take on a specific political or economic system and why. To get right into it, we're starting off with Tywin Lannister. And personally, I think he would be a laissez faire capitalist. I think he would be a perfect oil tycoon. I can picture this guy, 19th century. He's 19th to 20th century. You know, it's like 1915. He's competing with like the Carnegie Oil Company or Steel. I can't remember. And he's just doing all this business, and he's buying out smaller companies, and he's busting union strikes, and he's hiring the Pinkertons to like kill people who want to do unions. I just think he seems like the kind of ruthless man who would love a competition like that to compete to see who can just truly be the worst human being imaginable. Okay, it's the Carnegie Steel Company, but I think he'd be an oil tycoon. I think that represents him more. It seems like more of a ruthless business. Now, next up we have Ned Stark, and I'm going to put Ned Stark as a libertarian because he seems like the kind of guy that just wants to be left alone. You know, he doesn't want the government to do too much in his life. I feel like he's like, the Ron Swanson. He just wants to chill with his family, do his own thing. He doesn't want government overreach. He like why is the government building a road near me, okay? No government, no money. I hate taxes. I want to spend my money doing what I want. What fire department? Never heard of it. Because when you read Ned Stark's chapters, he kind of seems like an isolationist. He doesn't really want to do a lot. Like, yeah, he seems like a nice person, so he'd probably like social welfare programs. But I don't know, I just can't see him as being a guy that loves high taxation, and social welfare programs equal high taxation. But he doesn't seem like a ruthless tycoon like Tywin, so I don't think he'd want to have like a ton of monopolization of industries. He just seems like the middleman who wants to be left alone with his family, pay low taxes, and chill. Now, this one's going to be a little bit of a curveball, but we're going to have Beric Dondarrion, and he is going to be an anarchist. Now, the reason why I choose anarchist is because he did a lot of anarchist shit. Like, obviously, he's really devout feudalist. He's a really devout monarchist. Like, he loves his king and he's defending the realm. So it's kind of vibes based, but I think he's the kind of guy who in real life he would get like he would fall into the anarchist ideology and then he'd do like a Unabomber and blow up a college. Because when you look at his story arc, he goes to take Gregor Clegane. He gets defeated, and he immediately decides to become a terrorist. He's like, okay, the Lannisters are bad. I don't really feel like joining up with the Starks, so I'm just gonna kill a ton of Lannisters because the realm needs defending. So I think if he was in like the 21st century, he watches a ton of TikToks about how nature's getting destroyed. He'd be the kind of guy to build a pipe bomb and blow up a company. That just seems like who he would be. Now, this character is really, really going to be the curveball. It's going to be Gendry, and I'm going to say he's a syndicalist. Now, if you don't know what syndicalism is, I didn't either before I looked it up, but it's pretty much communism, but they believe that the government should be run by trade unions so that trade unions have control over what the economy does, how things are done. And I really just put Gendry because he was an apprentice blacksmith, and I think he'd like having people that actually produced things that are valuable for society to run society. Now, obviously, I don't think Gendry would do this. I just think it'd be cool for him to be a syndicalist, and I wanted to add syndicalism in here, and no one else was going to be a syndicalist, so Gendry's my fall guy. Now, the next character here is not a person per se, but this is the entire city state of Braavos, and I'm going to put them down as a mercantilist. Makes the most sense. Braavos would love to go to other places, take their resources, bring it back, and make a ton of money. There are three things that Braavos is known for: being really good at trade, hating slavery, and having the faceless men, and the Iron Bank. But the Iron Bank kind of goes hand in hand with trade. So Braavos being a really like a natural resource, barren place. There's not a lot of things. They're in a saltwater lagoon. They would need colonies, and I think that they would do that if it existed. They could make colonies in the north to get lumber. They could go down to like fertile areas to get food. And they could find all this ways to get raw resources to produce things in Braavos and make more money, have more control over the trade. Because an interesting thing, a lot of people are going to say, oh, what about slavery? They don't like slavery. They can't be mercantilists. But mercantilism isn't inherently supportive of slavery. It's just that most mercantilists really like slavery because it's a cheaper way to get labor. But I feel like the Braavosi would just find a way to survive without slaves. Now, this character is not from the main series, but I have Brynden Rivers, and unsurprisingly, he is going to be a fascist. When you look at what Brynden does, he's a pretty, fascism is kind of his thing. He's a very hard authoritarian. He kind of creates his own secret police to kill anyone that disagrees with the crown. Now, this was somewhat just because you did have the Blackfire rebellions, and Bittersteel was in ASOS, kind of trying to find a way to steal the crown, which he did like 4 more times. But he still created a secret police. He still had hard control over the citizens. Remember during the Great Spring Sickness and like the drought, he didn't allow freedom of travel. He suppressed citizens' rights. He kind of just does all this. He's got an informative spies. So I think fascism would be kind of big. Nationalism would be something that he would incorporate because nationalism would kind of help repel the Blackfire rebellions. Because the Blackfire rebellions is its own form of nationalism in a way. So if you have a counter nationalism where you're talking about how great the Daeron is and how amazing he is for the country and how you're so proud to be Westerosi, and if you find a way to spin Daeron and his children as being like foreign raised because they spent most of the time in ASOS in exile, you could find a way to kind of allow nationalism to rise up to combat Bittersteel and his ASOC backers. Because don't forget, Bittersteel kind of had like an agreement with Tyrosh in the first Blackfire Rebellion, and like the other ones, I don't know. I'm not an expert on those. But I think fascism and Brynden Rivers would go hand in hand. Now, obviously, Brynden wasn't a fascist, but in real life, I could see him as that. Daenerys Targaryen is my next candidate, and I'm going to say she is a social democrat. Now, this is very similar to a democratic socialist, but a social democrat believes in like the systems of capitalism. They just believe that the government should have more social programs and they should have higher marginal tax rates and higher corporate tax rates to fund those social welfare programs to kind of reduce the economic gap between the wealthy and the poor. And I think that this fits Daenerys quite well because Daenerys is still a monarchical authoritarian ruler, but she does seem to care about her citizens. She does give food to the struggling Yunkai people that go to her gates who are sick. She gives them medicine. She tries to help them. Now, of course, a lot of them end up dying because of the Pale Mare, but Daenerys still strives to do what is right. So I think social democracy would be a great thing for her because it's the middle way between all out like Marxism, which I don't think she would do because that would involve her giving up power as queen, and I just don't see that as happening right now. And even in a real life world, I wouldn't see that, but I would see as her being like the president, the main leader, maybe like one of those presidents that serve for life, but with higher marginal tax rates, higher corporate tax rates to fund these social programs. All right, I've got 4 more characters left, and first we're going to start off with Kevin Lannister, and I'm going to put him down as a moderate Republican. If he was in the real world, I could very well see him as being like the 64-year-old guy in the office, who's nice to everyone, he's got the jokes, and he just, he doesn't share his political beliefs, and then he just votes Republican at the booth. He seems like the kind of guy, he's like, oh, I think it's better for the economy and whatnot. And when we look at his character in the story, it makes sense because he seems to be someone who is good. He's not an actively terrible person, but he actively abides bad people. Like, he follows his brother blindly and willingly, even though Tywin has done the most depraved shit imaginable. And I think that's a little bit what moderate Republicans do. Not fully, but there are some aspects and some similarities to be had between Kevin Lannister and moderate Republicans. Next up, I have Janna Lannister as a liberal Democrat or something along those lines. I think she would be the kind of person to live in like New Jersey or like a northeastern state. She seems the kind of person like during COVID she would be masking, but she would have like the really cool masks that like she knitted herself. Now, the reason why I put her as liberal Democrat is just vibes. It's just vibes. I really don't have any strong reasons like some of the other characters. I just think that she fits that kind of person because she's kind of an outlier when it comes to the Lannisters because she just does her own thing. Because technically she's like a Frey now, but she's off from the sidelines doing her own thing. She's scheming. She's, convincing her husband to do this. And she seems like a good person. Like, she talked to Jaime. She's like, oh yeah, my brother Tywin, idiot. Kevin, idiot. All he does is follow around Tywin. They're both dumb. I think I'm better than them. And overall, she just seems like a nice person. A very mean tongue, but she's really only mean to mean people. And that's my favorite kind of mean person. Now, this next one is going to be a little bit provocative, get a little bit touchy into like the darker areas of politics. But I have our boy Joffrey Lannister as a neo-Nazi, specifically an incel groiper. And if you don't know what a groiper is, don't look it up. I'm already upset that I had to learn what that term is, but he's the kind of guy to go on TikTok, watch Andrew Tate, watch all these far-right, alt-right influencers talk about how women are the problem and how men need to be the alpha, sigma, beta, kappa, delta, pi, and take back the world. And he just seems like that kind of loser. And I think now alt-right, like red pill and neo-Nazi kind of go hand in hand in my opinion. So he is an alt-right neo-Nazi. No, he's a red-pilled neo-Nazi. I think he'd be the kind of guy to glaze World War II Germany. I mean, we know how much he was gushing over the Targaryens. So how much do you think he'd be gushing over the H-Man? I think he'd be the kind of guy to be into conspiracy theories. He'd talk about like the 9/11 conspiracies and the Holocaust conspiracies. Because when you look at Joffrey, what is he but a cruel, vindictive idiot? And cruel, vindictive idiots really like to find ways to hate minorities. And that's also why I have him as an incel, because he already doesn't like women in a world where he's in an extreme position of power where he can do whatever he wants to women. So imagine how he reacts when he's in a world where he doesn't have a hierarchical power over women. I mean, the hierarchical power still somewhat exists, but he doesn't have the power of a king. He's just a guy. So what's he going to do when the first woman rejects him? He's going to cry. And then he's going to start calling them the B word and start saying that they're all losers and they need to submit to men. Now, we don't know much about Joffrey's, what he does with women because he was like 11. So I'm going to do a little bit of show-only things because I think it's a good characterization. But remember when he kills that woman that Tyrion brought to his room? That's what an incel does. Now, let's leave this video on a little bit of a good note. I have Barristan Selme, Barristan the Bold, Barristan the Old. I think he's the kind of person to call himself fiscally conservative but socially liberal. I just think it makes sense. He's old, he's a little bit set in his traditions, but he did travel halfway across the world to serve a 12-year-old girl, and he loves that girl as like a granddaughter. He cares about her deeply. So I just think that blend between old-timey values and modern values would really blend, and he'd be like, I think the economy, like in real life, he'd be like, oh yeah, I think the economy should be run by Republicans, but like social rights, that should be a Democrat thing. That should be a left thing. And honestly, I can't really blame the guy. I can blame the guy in real life, but when you look at his situation, you can kind of get where he's from. He's like one of the oldest people in Westeros. Maybe behind Maester Pycelle and Maester Aemond. But, he's getting up there. Let me go check his age. Okay, so he's 63, which is 40 years younger than Aemon's 101, and 20 years younger than Pycelle's 80, but he's still pretty old. So, I think that the socially progressive, fiscally conservative thing makes sense. I do think that that's just what he would be. So, like, in real life, he'd be like the Tucker Carlson. No, the Joe Rogan, I think he said that. He was, like, kind of the one that coined the phrase. He'd be the kind of guy, like, during the BLM movements, he'd be like, he'd agree with it, but he'd still believe in, like, republicanism, so he wouldn't be, like, that hard against it. He'd be the Republican to be masking and to be telling his old friends to mask. Who knows, maybe he would transition to fully leftist once Daenerys' communist ways get a hold of him.